This occurred about 8 years ago now. A close friend and I were on fall break from college and decided to go to an Odessa concert in downtown Chicago. We grew up in the suburbs, so going to Chicago to have fun was pretty common for us. We had a great time at the concert and decided to Uber home since we weren't close to any train station. My friend told me Uber wasn't working for him at the moment, so that's when I opened up the app, but this was literally my first time ever using it, and I accidentally called an Uber pool not knowing what it was. My friend saw that and was like, it really doesn't matter. So the driver picks us up from right outside the concert venue. There were a lot of intoxicated people around, as one could imagine post-Odessa show, but we were pretty sober, as all we did was smoke some weed, which we were rather used to. We get in the car and everything's going normally, but we didn't immediately notice the direction the driver was taking us, as we were wrapped up in talking about the show. Turns out, the driver was going to the south side of Chicago, which we realized after some time by looking at the maps. But our suburb was exactly the opposite direction of this lengthy drive south. We decided to attribute this to the fact that it was an Uber pool and shrugged it off as best as we could, until we picked up this next passenger. To be honest, this girl scared us. I don't like to judge people, but she scared us just by looks, as well as how she spoke. Once the girl got in, we asked the driver where we were going first, to which he stopped answering. Next thing I know, my phone lit up and said the Uber trip was canceled. And for this duration of the ride, Uber had no record of me being in the car. I asked the driver what the deal was, and again, he didn't answer. The girl and the driver 100% knew each other, as they were calling each other by nicknames. The girl was being weird and seemed to be doing some hand signals to him. All this while we proceeded to drive further south into this neighborhood, which was probably the sketchiest neighborhood I've ever seen in my life. I didn't realize neighborhoods like this even existed. Every house was completely wrecked. There were no street signs on most streets. Nearly all of the streetlights were out. Homeless people lying on sidewalks. And we were starting to see beat down warehouses and alleys everywhere. This was by far the scariest area that I've ever seen. Once we started seeing all of this, our hearts dropped because the driver still wouldn't respond to us. My friend then looks over to me and whispers, "We need to get the fuck out of here." To which I replied, "Dude, look where we are." So we just stayed in the car. Then we get driven down this alley behind a warehouse where the streets ended, and there were just fields beyond it. The driver's going down this alley at like 2 miles per hour, but he keeps going. The girl and Uber driver were clearly discussing something serious, but we couldn't make it out since they were using mostly signals. At that point, our hearts sank even harder, and we literally both thought we were going to be killed in this alley. Or at best, someone was going to get in the car and rob us. That's when the driver stopped, and the doors unlocked. I was in complete shock with a pale face when all of a sudden my friend says, "Hey, I'm completely sober, and I'm about to fucking call 911. I can only assume that this driver was waiting around the concert to pick up some wasted people who would allow this to happen. But we weren't them. Now, my friend's admission, he was serious about. He had 911 dialed on his phone. That's when the Uber driver looks back at us in the rear view, clearly not anticipating what my friend had said. He looks at the girl, and the girl's pretty shocked too. She shakes her head no, before simply saying, "What the fuck?" and getting out of the car. Without a word, the driver then drives out of this neighborhood and onto the highway towards our suburb. All of a sudden, my Uber app gave me a notification saying we were now in a ride. And at this point, the driver starts talking to us again. Now, obviously not giving us any answers, but saying that he's driving us home. We were stunned, asking this guy what the f just happened, and he refused to answer. All he said was that he was taking us home. About 20 minutes later, we made it home safely, and that's when I took the time to report the Uber driver for that ride. We think that he must have been trying to wait for wasted people to pool so that he could get away with this, but he realized we were too big of a risk when it came time to do what they were going to do. We've accepted that we're part of a mugging scheme and got lucky that we decided not to get faded at the concert. I can't speak for my friend, but I know that I had anxiety for weeks after this. But I know now just how sketchy some areas can be and how to be a little more safe when in Chicago, specifically by not calling an Uber pool outside of a concert. It really is strange to me that people opt to live sketchy lives like this and victimize other people, but it was an eye-opening experience. I'd say that an otherwise fun night was properly tainted, but at least there was a lesson learned. Hey guys, if you're into the content that we create, we've got a Patreon where you can support the show and get early access to new episodes before everyone else. Just head on over to patreon.com/malevolentmischief or check the link in the description and join our community today. This story happened well over 10 years ago when I was still a student. It has a few graphic details of animal harm and graphic violence, so discretion is advised. A bit of backstory. As with most students, I was always broke and had a few ventures apart from my part-time job to bring me extra money. One of them was house and pet sitting. I've always had a love for animals, so when this couple contacted me to ask me to house sit for them for the last few days before they returned from their overseas trip, as the last sitter bailed on them and their 6-month-old golden retriever puppy would be alone, I jumped at the opportunity. The fact that they promised to pay me the full 2-week fee for staying there less than a week made it all that much more appealing. Little did I know how bad that all of this would turn out. I got the details, got the keys from the agent, and headed over to the house as it was already after 5 p.m. and nearly dark, as it was early spring if I remember correctly. I got to the house, which was a really nice place, but it bordered on a not-so-good area that was and still is prone to crime. Home break-ins, robberies, etc. Even knowing that, I wasn't really bothered, because, I figured nothing was going to happen to me. I know, young and naive. The first 4 nights went without a hitch, watching movies, jacuzzi, and just generally enjoying myself. The owners would have returned on the 5th day, fairly late at night. I got a call from them about 10 p.m. saying their flight got delayed, that they were going to stay in a hotel and do the 3.5-hour drive back the following morning. They asked if it would be too much trouble if I slept there again that night. It was fine by me. I was already there and had my overnight bag still in the car. I called my dad to let him know of the plans because I was still staying with my parents, and he specifically asked what the address was. Now, I normally didn't give them details like that because I was old enough to look after myself, but I still believe to this day that giving my dad the address that night likely saved my life. I eventually got to bed at around 1 a.m., and it felt like I had only slept 5 minutes when I was awoken to the sound of a window breaking. I could hear movement in the house and what sounded like footsteps running down the hallway. The first thing I did was grab my phone and just hit redial. Thanks to my old Motorola phone, redialing was as simple as pressing one button, and that connected me with my dad, who was the last number that I had called. I remember laying there praying that that phone call woke him up. I then dropped the phone in between the headboard and mattress in case my dad picked up. That way he could hear what was going on. I had barely done that when the first guy stormed through the bedroom door. I could see his silhouette and the knife that he held in his hand. When he saw me, he instantly raised it and came right for me. Now, one thing for those that are unfamiliar with South Africa, where I come from, and the crime there, robberies and home invasions are usually very brutal and violent. People will get murdered or tortured if they retaliate in the slightest or not cooperate fully with the robbers. Out of instinct, I raised my legs back when he came at me, and when he came within reach, I kicked both legs out as hard as I possibly could. Now, I'm not a small guy. I'm 6'3", and at that stage in my life, I weighed about 100 kilograms, or 220 pounds, and I was fit and strong. My time not spent at uni or work was usually at the gym. So when I kicked out and made contact with the guy, he completely lifted off the ground and nearly shot into the wall. Luckily, the knife also shot out of his hand. Before he got the chance to get up, I was on top of him, driving my right knee into his face and in return, his head into the wall. I felt like my life depended upon it, so I put in just a little extra force. The guy dropped like a sack of potatoes, but before I could jump up, I heard the sound of a pistol cock, and that made me freeze. It felt like all the blood had drained from my body, and I had become numb. I remember the only thing that went through my head was that if he shot me, I would rather die than be disabled or dependent upon other people to have to take care of me. This man stood behind me with the pistol pressed up against my head for what felt like hours, but was likely less than 10 seconds. I didn't move a muscle, and he eventually said in very broken English to get on the bed face down. I panicked, but I also thought that if he really wanted to shoot me, that he already would have done so. So I did as he said. He threw a blanket over me, and I turned into the fetal position with my back up against the wall, just so if they wanted to stab me, that I had my legs and arms in front of me, doing the best to protect my body. Now by that time, I had forgotten that I had even called my dad, and the guy that I had kneed was still down. I heard a third guy come into the room, and I could hear what sounded like Portuguese to me. I couldn't understand what they said, but I recognized it, as we used to go to Mozambique on holiday a lot, and that is the main language spoken there. The one guy tried to get the guy that I put down off the ground, while the other started to ransack the house, shoving valuables into a big bag. It was about at this time that I heard tires screeching and a car approaching at what sounded like Mach 1. The car skidded to a halt right in front of the gate, and that's when I heard someone scream. I knew right then that it was my dad. The three men inside the house panicked. They all ran out the back door and tried to jump the fence. My dad opened fire, shooting in their general direction. Now, I know my dad missed them on purpose because if he wanted to hit them, he would have, as he is not one of, but the best shot that I know. And I'm not just saying that because he's my dad. He's ex-Army Special Forces. He represented South Africa in the Clay Pigeon World Championships a couple of years. He's got various regional pistol and rifle championship titles and is a gunsmith by occupation. I've seen him hit golf balls at 50 meters with his pistol. Once I had my wits, I grabbed the house keys and pressed the gate remote, and my dad called the police when he came in. I met him at the front door and we walked out to the car to wait there for the cops. It took them over an hour to get there, some excuse of no vehicle available. And by the time they had reached the house, I had calmed down, and that's when I started to look for the dog. I couldn't find her anywhere. I grabbed a flashlight from my dad and started scanning the surrounding yard, and as I got to the corner, I could see her lying on the ground. I got to her and, unfortunately, she was dead. Later, autopsies would reveal that she was poisoned, and the police found pieces of meat laced with poison near the fence. Poisoning is actually a pretty standard practice in my country for dealing with dogs at a house or an area that's targeted for a break-in or a robbery. I was fuming, and yet also terribly sad. The police were also pretty useless, and they had a don't-give-a-sh type attitude. They barely took our statements. By the time it was starting to get light out, I retrieved my bag, phone, and locked the house as well as I could without touching anything, and then drove home behind my dad. Only when I got home did I get the story from my dad's side. He said he answered my call, only to hear the shouting and what sounded like fighting going on, and when I didn't respond, he flew out of the house and raced over. This really should underscore just how lucky I was that he asked me for the address the previous night. Now, my dad got there pretty quickly, and he said that he stayed on the line the whole time, only hanging up when he finally reached the gate. My parents' house is about 10 kilometers or 6 miles from where I was, through a residential area. It's what I would normally call about a 15-minute drive. But the call duration itself was only 9 minutes. I met the detective there later that day, Gave my statement. They took fingerprints, and the owners got back at around the same time. The rest of the day was a blur for me, as I came down from both the shock and the adrenaline rush. Now, this isn't exactly where the story ends. About 7 or 8 months later, I got a call from the detective telling me they caught the guys, and I had to come do a lineup to point them out. I specifically told her that I didn't see any of their faces as it was dark, and after the guy held the gun at my head, I was under the blanket and didn't see anything further. She assured me that they caught them on fingerprints and will show them to me beforehand, which might not be ethically the correct way to do it, but they wanted to have as much evidence as possible against them. You'll understand why in a minute. I got to the police station, and unlike how you see it in the movies, there's no one-way glass or separate room. They bring 3 guys into the room and make them stand against the wall. The one which I was later told was the leader of the group, which was the one that I had kneed, looked at me in a way that I'd never been looked at in my life. It was absolutely filled with hate. He had the eyes of someone that would slit your throat and not blink an eye. His name was Joseph Dragon Sambo. He pulled his hand up to his neck and made the slit my throat gesture. I think you know the one. We left the room, and the detective gave me a copy of his rap sheet. Amongst other things, 4 counts of murder, I think 8 or 9 for attempted murder, multiple assaults, aggravated assaults, and over a dozen cases of home break-ins and robberies. I was shocked. The detective told me that had I not taken him out first and fast that night, I would have definitely not gotten away so lightly. 3 days later, I get another call from the detective saying that I should be careful, as Joseph Sambo had escaped custody and they hadn't caught up to him yet. I wasn't exactly worried, as the robbery wasn't at my house and I had changed cars, so I didn't think he was going to find me. Also, in the meantime, I got my firearm license and carried my own pistol on me 24/7. I didn't hear anything after that until about 2 years later, when I saw the detective in the grocery shop. We started talking about the case, and she told me that Joseph Sambo had been killed during another home invasion. He broke into the wrong house, and the owner was apparently waiting for him, pistol in hand. Shot him one time in the stomach, and another time in the neck. Thanks to the slow response time of emergency services and police, he bled out on the guy's living room floor, ridding society of a piece of human garbage. I'm just going to say that this whole ordeal has made me more vigilant. It's heightened my situational awareness and made me a little more paranoid too. I double and triple check all doors and locks each night. Also, thanks to my heightened situational awareness, this has allowed me to remove myself from a few potentially dangerous situations in the years after this incident. But it's also robbed me of my peace of mind. I've since immigrated to a safer country, but I still wake up sometimes at night with a jolt if I hear a noise coming from outside my room. So, to keep up with tradition of this sub, Joseph, we're never going to meet again as you've passed. But to his cronies or anyone that wants to try something similar, I'll be happy to arrange your swift departure and reunion with Joseph, all in hell. And to Joseph, I hope you died in agony for what you did to Daisy. To put this into context, I'm a 22-year-old girl living in New Zealand. I suffer from anxiety and tend to shut down in stressful situations. I become rather overwhelmed when I'm not sure how exactly to deal with something. This story took place about 4 years back, while we were still in the midst of COVID. One evening, I was waiting at my bus station to catch a bus home. I'd had a long day at work and my legs were in pain. All I really wanted to do was get home and watch some YouTube in bed. It was getting dark out. The sun had almost completely disappeared from the sky. As I was listening to some music in a rather deserted area of the bus station, a man considerably larger than myself sauntered up and sat down directly next to me on the bench. Something I didn't really think much of at that moment. Now, to put this into perspective, I'm roughly 110 pounds. This guy must have easily been pushing 250. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that this guy was now staring at me, and this began to make me feel a little uncomfortable. But in my mind, I rationalized it as him looking at my mask. He wasn't wearing one himself, and I know some people have rather polarizing ideas about wearing masks in the first place. I tried to ignore this and acted busy on my phone to avoid talking. As I said, I had had a long day at work. But almost like clockwork, this man began to talk at me, and I pulled out my AirPod to listen to what he was saying. When I took it out of my ear, the AirPod fell and landed on the ground, to which he picked it up for me. But instead of handing it back, he held onto it and stared at it for a few seconds, before eventually giving it back to me. I can tell you now, I was already getting bad vibes from this guy. The conversation itself went something like this. "Your eyes are beautiful. Did you get them from your mom or your dad?" My mom, I guess. I kept my reply short to try to signify that I wasn't in the mood for talking, but he just continued. "What bus are you catching? Where do you live?" I laughed nervously and told him I didn't feel very comfortable sharing where I lived with a stranger, but I told him it was farther up north. He then said, "Why? It's not like I'm going to attack you. Isn't it really fancy up there?" This is where I began to feel seriously uncomfortable, and I can remember beginning to shake. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which I said yes, and he proceeded to ask if I planned to marry him, to which I laughed and said yes. "Oh, it kind of sounds like you're just rooting him. Are you sure you want to marry him?" I was shocked and looked at him before telling him again, "Yeah, I do plan to marry my partner." He then asked, "How old are you?" I don't know what came over me, but I told him I was 21, to try to make it come across that I was old enough to stand up for myself. His next question was, "Are you on the pill?" "I'm sorry, man. I don't feel comfortable sharing that and don't see why you need to know." "Oh, so you use condoms instead, eh?" I wanted to walk away, but I felt stuck to the bench, and I couldn't move a muscle if I tried. I was uncomfortable and confused as to why he was even asking these questions. "Do you have someone waiting for you at the bus stop, or are you walking home? How far do you live from the bus stop?" This is the question that made everything click into place, and I realized this guy had some malicious intent on his mind. He's not being friendly. Far from it. This man is going to follow me home and either rape me or kidnap me. I started to really panic and started desperately looking for onlookers. A young man, right around my age, walked out of the public restroom and overheard the last bit of that conversation. This at least caused him to look at the predator rather skeptically. I knew then I'd at least have someone to help if I just asked for it. But I didn't. At this point, I remembered another story that I had heard about on Reddit, about a highly pregnant woman and her daughters being followed to their car in an empty car park by an older man. This lady was stressfully trying to find her keys in her purse as this man was standing beside her daughters on the opposite side of the car, just making small talk with them. Eventually, this man got impatient, and he walked away before she'd found her keys. Someone commented on her story saying that this was a popular thing, that he was waiting for her to unlock her car so that he could get in and control her via threats to her children. It occurred to me that I should skip my bus and catch another one at a later time. That's exactly what I did. This man kept trying to ask where I lived, and I continued to refuse telling him where. He also continued to ask how far I lived from the stop, and if my partner was waiting for me. I deflected all of his questions, and after 40 minutes, he began to get grumpy and walked away from the station. He wasn't there to catch a bus at all, but it seems like he was there to prey on a young woman at a bus stop. I caught my bus about 10 minutes after he left, and I ran home, where I completely broke down and cried in the arms of my boyfriend. The next morning, I was so stressed that I contemplated taking the day off of work and staying in bed for the rest of it. I was absolutely petrified. I didn't stay home though. I went to work, and that was the first moment that I thought about sharing this story, although it's taken me a couple years to get there. After all of this had sunken in, I was able to clearly and plainly realize that following other people's let's not meet stories had kept me safe when coming face to face with a predator. I normally read these types of accounts for the entertainment they provide. I never once thought that one would help me get out of my own sketchy situation. Very thankful for that.